You're good.
Okay.
Hello, how's everyone here doing today? My name is Daniel. I'm here with special guest Amanda Rachwitz, I think. Sounds
Rock.
Jewish. Rockwitz?
Yeah, it's even more Polish German than it looks.
Right, yeah,
Yeah.
Polish, Jewish. If you can't pronounce it, it's one of those names.
Yeah, I'm
Uh,
Prussian and my ancestry is Polish, all like if you go all the way back. So it's Rockwitz. It's basically Rockwits is how you would pronounce it.
right.
But obviously it doesn't look that way. So
Okay.
Rockwitz.
Prussian. So you know all about the school system in the U.S. Um, all right, we're here with nicknamed the Dragon Lady or the Dragon Anarchist. Sorry. Uh,
Dragon anarchist.
she breathes fire, I guess, or something. Uh, I'm not really sure. Well, what's the derivation of that name?
Well, the way that started was, I grew up as a kid loving fantasy, and I sort of had a thing for dragons, growing up in my adolescence. But when I woke up to the lie that is um, the state, the lie, the myth of authority, that, some people get an exemption from morality and have the right to rule us. And I started seeing how the state functions. I noticed how one of the biggest tools of the state is that, each, ruling class over its own cattle farm has to portray itself as a protector by portraying outside groups of people as the boogeyman. And so there's this state propaganda around a certain type of person that's designed to create fear. And then there's how those individuals might really be, and they're two separate things in reality, but the state always has to demonize some other group of people out there in order to get people to clamor for the protection of the state and believe that their own government is good and legitimate and all of that. And when I saw that that's how the state functioned, one day I was pondering the different narratives about the myth of dragons, and I'm thinking about dragons often since I like them. And one day I thought, how interesting is it that there's these two totally different narratives in fantasy and myth and lore about dragons? In one narrative, dragons are this incredibly wise, as sentient, if not more, conscious than even humans are, good being that has a lot of power but doesn't use it for evil and doesn't just use it frivolously. And they've been around for a very long time, and so they've acquired a lot of wisdom, and humans sort of bond with them and learn from them and have friendships with them. There's this narrative over here, and then there's this whole other narrative where the dragon is just this mindless fire-breathing monster, and all it does is sit around and try to kill people when you approach it. But it's always a state minion that has to go and kill the dragon to save who? The innocent woman or the townspeople of the women and children. Like it's the state guy that always has to go and be the hero. It's always a knight. It's always the ruling class. And I thought, wouldn't it be funny if sometime in, pre-actual human record, where we weren't really necessarily recording stuff, or maybe we lost this history, if dragons actually existed, but they were this really, really good thing, and they had a lot of power, so they could use that power, that, the ability to fly and breathe fire defensively or to defend, against evil. And to warlords who want to rule people, that was a huge threat. And so they just painted, through story and through their own ways of spreading lies and rumors, the state of the time, or governments, painted the dragon as this evil monster and sent out their little minions to go and kill the things because they were a threat to power. I thought, what a fun sort of theory that is, because it seems likely, since there's these two drastic narratives of how the dragons work. Now, this is all based on the notion, of course, if dragons actually existed. And there are some people that I've talked to, quite a few people, who surprisingly think that there is enough evidence in literature that there might have been some creature like the dragon far enough back, but we can't really know at this point. And so I thought that was an interesting theory. And I thought, what if the dragon could work as a sort of idealized version of a human? We start off as humans and we sort of fumble through our lives trying to figure out reality around us. And we have all this distortion and all this fog created by people who are trying to lie to us, created by the state and by compulsory schooling, and passed down unintentionally by parents and stuff through religious bullshit that doesn't make any sense, that isn't clear, that isn't well thought out. There's all these ways in which we're sort of in the dark and fumbling, and we have to find a way to get our brains and our clarity of thought back and rescue it. And in so doing, we're rescuing our wisdom. And in so doing, we actually get a clear vision of reality that allows us to be more effective human beings in reality. And so I thought, if a dragon has been around hundreds of years and it's this really wise creature because it's been around so long, it has probably a very accurate version of reality, a vision of reality that is way above what most humans have. And so it's more effective in the world it lives in, and has a lot of influence because of that, if it's a really good being. And so I thought it would be a great sort of symbolism of what humans can strive to be. If we refine our ideas and we get clearer on how we see the world, that makes our actions in reality more effective, and that expands our effective influence in reality. Much like the dragon has expansive influence because it has wings, it can fly, it has more reach than just a human does. So my website sort of has this short blurb about the philosophy of a dragon. It says, ideas give wings to the soul of what makes us human, and we start as humans, but through refining our ideas and getting clear on reality, we can become dragons and spread that influence and become more effective. So it's actually, a little bit something more of substance than just, well, dragons are pretty.
That's cool. Yeah. See, when I heard it, I thought, maybe it could mean, that the dragon is sort of the state, that, this powerful thing that, you say, you give power to a group of people and you say, I want you to smite my enemies, but never turn around and set me on fire. So, right. So that,
right.
Could be a possibility. And some people say, well, maybe. Sorry, what?
No, I was going to say that could be a useful, symbolism there too, if you want to use the dragon in a negative way. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Or some people could say, well, maybe the dragon's like the state, that it doesn't exist. But see, I'm not a fan of that though, because the state does exist. It is real. And
right. It's real. The idea of it's the euphemisms that cover up what the state really is doing, that aren't real. It's the idea that there's this thing where an exemption from morality, or basically just barbarism, murder, theft, extortion, kidnapping. It's the idea that if you cover those things with prettier labels, that makes a new thing that's legitimate and good, and that's the hallucination. But that people are actually barbaric, that actual humans are extorting and killing people left and right, well, that obviously exists. It's it's the mask of people hallucinating that to be something somehow good for them, when they would defend against anyone else trying to do things to them like that. But if it's the state doing it, they'll actually tolerate it, or they'll defend that verbally, like that's a good thing. So yeah, government as this concept of you can somehow be barbaric and good in your barbarism, that concept doesn't exist, but the actual thing exists.
Right.
The warlords are real, obviously.
Right. Yeah. No, because I mean, a lot of people do this, and it boggles my mind. Like, well, if anarchy is good, show me evidence of an anarchist society. I'm like, well, what does that have to do with it? Like, show me a society without rape. Doesn't mean rape's justified.
Right.
The lack of existence doesn't mean anything. And the fact, plenty of shit exists. Okay? Right. Government exists, and it's evil. So just because something doesn't exist doesn't mean it's bad, and just because something exists doesn't mean it's good.
Right. Or the other weird thing that's interesting is when you finally get someone to acknowledge, government's not really a good thing, then they go, well, we can't just suddenly have no government. We need a transition. And I'm like, if I see a baby being raped and I walk in on that, I'm not going to go, well, I don't want to rush into stopping the rape. We need a transition because maybe the baby's used to being raped. Like, that's not how this works. If something is evil and it's actually evil, and people by definition don't want it, because they hallucinate that they want it, but when it's happening to them, they never want it. Then there's no such thing as,
but they want it for other people. Right?
Transition. Right. The only way in which people will feel uncomfortable, that there will be a transition phase of people feeling disturbed if they somehow consciously were aware that the government was gone, was that they couldn't immediately call up someone to harass their neighbor who was annoying them. And guess what? The minute they realized they couldn't easily do that, people would be, out of self-preservation, a lot more careful with how they acted. Why? Because if they do something stupid, or they piss off their neighbor, or they harass their neighbor directly, they have to deal with the fact that their neighbor can just retaliate, and there aren't a bunch of laws in the way that make it this red tape, bureaucratic, legally gray thing where they all have, either one can beat each other over the head with the stick of the state. They know that they have to deal directly with the person's actions, and that person will defend themselves however they wish. So people, and it's been demonstrated in other ways that this occurs, people get more careful and more civil the minute they know they can't call some savior, or that they can't rely on other people to call, to just follow some set of, rules that have been outlined for them. And in traffic experiments all over the globe, that's been demonstrated. They remove a traffic light, traffic accidents reduce in that intersection. They remove all traffic signals and signs in an area in, like, say, Germany or Europe. They did that recently, and there was a whole study on that particular area. Traffic accidents drastically reduced. I was just in Acapulco, Mexico. I've never seen such totally chaotic driving, and yet not a single accident occurred ever once. And there were, people of all ages driving, 12-year-olds and 13-year-olds I saw on mopeds and in cars driving. And nobody's paying attention to traffic lanes and signals. Everyone's just moving. But as soon as you can't rely, and you can't rely on everyone else around you to stay in a certain lane, or to do this or to do that, you don't have signs that are telling everyone else what to do, so the signs are doing the thinking for them. You have to be way more alert and way more careful about what you're doing. And that constant awareness and alertness that's at a way higher level makes everyone more efficient drivers and reduces the rate of accidents. And so it's the same thing with the state. There is no such thing as we couldn't handle suddenly government. First of all, there's no such thing as saying we can't handle suddenly no evil, because that's to advocate for, well, we need some evil transitionally. And that's, again, going back to the argument that some evil is necessary. And if it's actually evil, there's no such thing as good evil that's necessary, or that we have to have some of it. There's no such thing. And then secondly, people get smarter when they don't have the state to call, and get more careful. So that button that you could press, people have talked about, if you could press a button and everyone, immediately the state just wasn't there as a concept, would you do it? And I'd go, yeah, absolutely. People would adjust pretty quick.
Yeah. So I guess a few things to that. Well, first of all, I sort of like the trust game. If you've played that game, you believe your friend's going to catch you, you fall back, and if you don't, that defense mechanism seeps in. So I think that's certainly true. I think I sort of disagree somewhat with the transition. I think you sort of need a transition, but it's not to say that evil's necessary. It's to say that a sudden shift will cause such backlash, right? So if someone is employed by the state, and the state just fires everyone without giving them time to find new employment, they're just going to rebel. They're just going to break things. They're just going to smash things up. So I think you need a transition period, not in the sense that evil's necessary, but in order to not get people to try to say, what, I have no time to find alternate means of employment, and you're just going to create needless backlash. So I think gradualism is necessary to not create that backlash or that feeling of vulnerability.
I would argue that every government worker is being paid in stolen funds. So as long as they're being paid, it's requiring the government to extort other people to pay them. And because I don't believe there's ever any time where any extortion for any reason, even if it's to maintain a level of transition for these comfortable people who are used to getting their stolen funds, I don't believe that's ever legitimate. Then as uncomfortable as it would be for a bunch of people who are on a government paycheck, I would want to, it's sort of like I don't care who's going to pick the cotton. I don't care trying to figure out a transition. Slavery's evil, end it now sort of a thing. We've heard Larkin say that a million times. And that's where I'm at. And I actually still believe that out of pure selfishness and preservation, other than the select few idiots, and they are a minority, they are absolutely a minority, other than the select few idiots who are dumb enough to go right out into the city and start bashing crap and rioting and stuff. Other than that, and those people are sort of a lower form of human, then most human beings who are suddenly don't have a job, they figure stuff out. First of all, the recession recently in the US, that affected almost everyone on some level, or a good portion of the US on some level. And the majority of people, struggled, moved back in with parents, moved in with family, lost houses. They
Look at
didn't
what they're
suddenly
doing
become
in Greece.
these
Look at what
violent,
they're doing in Greece. In Greece, people are rioting because they're not getting their government favors. People are creating a ruckus, right? Because that sudden shift does, I think, create a vacuum of, I'm not used to this sudden lifestyle, so I'm just gonna. I mean, what's happening in Greece?
Right.
So I think
but the fact that people will riot or will get upset doesn't justify robbing or having a transitional phase of, well, we got to keep robbing for a little while some people to pay these people. It's sort of like we take the risk that they're going to be assholes, but we still stop this evil. It's the fact that the number one thing is, this is not okay. This is evil and it needs to stop now. And I also think that as far as the Greece thing, because I've seen so much of how every government, every state, and its media outlets uses propaganda, and how carefully they can selectively pick stories or set up provocateurs or set up stories to make situations look more violent than they are. I actually believe that, if you went in Greece, like any other place, is still full of a bunch of individuals, a bunch of regular people, and it's mostly, like almost everywhere you'll go, it's mostly regular people living life regularly, and then you have a few people who get upset, and there's this little riot thing going on right in this pocket, and then what happens is a media outlet comes and reports on that and then goes, Greece is in chaos, and it's like, no, this group of people rioting right here in this town, having a fit, is in chaos. But if you constantly report on you look for pockets of that, then what you do is you distort how reality really is to the rest of the world. And every government's constantly doing that. And so that was one reason I wanted to go to Mexico. Mexico is a huge country, first of all. So for these stories to say Mexico's dangerous, don't go to Mexico, that's like saying the US is dangerous. The US is huge. There are a million microcultures in the US and a million peaceful places in it all over the place. And there are also a million little pockets of maybe some dummies that are causing a bit of a fuss, but that's the minority of people. And I think in Greece, that's still the minority, because they have an agenda, the media does, to portray the collapse of a currency as something to be terrified of, because fear porn is something the state's always used. If the state can get everyone afraid, especially of like a currency collapse or anything else, if they can make everyone afraid, that's the one thing where they can manipulate exactly, they can manipulate humans in their actions, because they know what they're going to do. If you're afraid, they know you're now going to act out of self-preservation rather than acting out of calm, collected, peaceful strategy in a fearless way that says, I'm not afraid of you, and I'm not trying just to preserve my life. I'm trying to think smart, and I'm trying to go after the root and attack, the root of the tree that is statism. But if they keep people afraid and defensive and in survival mode, then people aren't thinking strategically, they aren't calm, and they're easily predictable. And so I'm very careful about how I let certain stories coming from other countries affect me, when it's especially centered around, oh my God, chaos, the currency is collapsing, or, the people are angry because, they're mad at the government and they're mad at this, and they just blanket statement, this collectivize an entire country and go, this country is in chaos. When likely, if you go there, you could, have an awesome vacation and explore a good bit of the country, and everybody would appear peaceful and fine. And you might get to a few pockets where there's some stress or tension. And it's the same way in the US, for other people in other countries, they imagine the US to be, a certain way, because in their heads, they're not thinking clearly. They're seeing an entire country full of 350 million people as this one thing. And then they go, we hate the US. The US isn't a thing. There's just individuals that live on a geographic area of land. There's a bunch of them. And it varies just from one, state to the next in the US, one geographic boundary to the next. It widely varies. It varies within the state I live in, because Arizona is huge. The kind of cultures you'll see just in this area. And so it's one of those things where getting people to think clearer about what reality is by looking at the real world they're living in every day and not constantly conflating that with media and video and propaganda and other stuff coming in as the world, and remembering that that's still someone else portraying something outside to them, and you can't necessarily trust that. You have to be very careful about going, oh, that's how that whole country is, or that's how that whole area is. And that's what I'm passionate about. Like, this all ties into, sort of what my focus is, and I mean this among the liberty community and regular people alike. I want to help people continue to rescue their brain at different levels from the distortion that, propaganda, state indoctrination, various, forms of, unclear thinking in religious, communities. I want to help rescue them from that, because I'm still clearing that fog from my brain every single day. And I've already seen how far I've come. And the clearer people think, and the more they see what's really going on in the real world and act in congruence with the real world, the more people are going to be effective at changing it. And, we can't be effective at changing it if we imagine, if I imagine that the whole world is going to kill me any second, so I don't leave my house, and I'm an agoraphobe that can't handle even thinking about going into the outside world, I'm a completely useless human being in terms of affecting any positive change on that. And why? I have a distorted, fearful view of reality that isn't accurate. That's using one extreme, but those people exist. We know those people that don't go outside and are literally afraid of the real world. So my focus is just trying to get people to get past the layers of distortion, or at least be able to hold something in suspense and go, that's still not my direct experience of that reality. For example, anytime I see a video or news story about any other country I've never been to, I remind myself immediately that that is a pocket of media that might have been intentionally honest and might have been intentionally dishonest, and it's still a piece of that world and that reality. It has a bunch of context to it I couldn't have seen or known about beforehand and after. I don't live in that world, and I don't personally know those people. And it's important to remember that anytime you're reading or hearing about stories from other places you've never been and you've never directly experienced. I went to Acapulco, Mexico. Ooh, there was a big rape there. It's all in the news. It's all in the media. Oh, scary. Don't go there. Acapulco's a big culture full of a bunch of people. It's a regular place like every other place. And I went there, and it was fine, and I had a good time. And the actual people that live in Acapulco were incredibly friendly. They're either totally minding their own business and are indifferent to you, or they're really friendly. And, they want the tourist business. They want to please you and sell you their wares. And they want to be very friendly and appealing to you because they want you to have a good time, because it's a touristy place. They want you to come back and spend your money. It was an absolute blast. There's nothing, I didn't even get a vibe of, oh, this is a scary place. This is unsettling. They're fascists and federal, like the federales and military, decked out military gear men in trucks that were driving around the city. Not once did a single one of them or the police ever actually harass anyone the entire time I was there. There were more of them than I'm used to seeing in the place I live, and I still didn't feel unsafe. It doesn't mean I wanted them there. Ideally, I wouldn't have them there. But they were standing, they're almost like just sort of statues. They were mostly standing in their spots all the time, totally stoic and not moving. And if you like nod at them, they just kind of nod at you. And they're not hunting people down and writing tickets. They don't care about what somebody's doing in traffic. They aren't really even talking to anyone. They just stand there. And there were at least 10 to a dozen within a mile of the area, military and police, fascist type people hanging out. Not a single thing happened at all. And not once did I see them even approach anyone. So, that was my direct experience of that reality. And I wanted to go there and verify for myself, is Acapulco some big scary place? No. So, seeing reality as it is important. And I just think a lot of people are too quick to fall into the mindset of their idea of reality, they forget, is tied to a bunch of actual media that wasn't their direct experience of it. They conflate it with a direct experience. Whoops. I lost my headphones.
Oh, no.
I'm back. I can hear you now.
All right. Beautiful.
I knocked my headphones out. So, yeah, that's all that to say, it's about helping people see, you know, what's going on in the real world. Look at your everyday life and your experiences that you're having. It's one reason I point out that, you know, people live as anarchists most of the time. And oftentimes they've never participated in the military. Most people haven't participated in terms of like being a part of a government job or police force. The government portions of any country, those people are still a tiny minority of all the people in the country. So most people live as far as their actions they take. They don't take any coercive actions against individual. They live peacefully. But when you talk to them, what do? They verbally advocate that bullshit with their mouth. Yeah. That's because they've been trained up here to have that huge contradiction, and they'll defend it. But when you look at how they live in a cooperative manner. So just getting rid of that little, you know, hey, this group of humans over here gets to legitimately extort you, and that's a good thing. Getting rid of that is the big thing. But their life itself isn't going to change much, because most of the time people are living non-coercively and without government. It's only when they imagine they're losing a security blanket of the government protecting them from the boogeyman that they start to feel uneasy.
Yeah, not very well said. I mean, I agree with a lot of that. I mean, I don't think it's totally, and maybe I'm just a cynic, but I don't think it's totally that people have been propagandized into believing the state. I mean, I think, and I say this based just, you know, on personal experience interacting with people, most people do not like confrontation. And most people don't like saying no. And people would rather, there is something appealing, I think, for being able to hire goons to do your dirty work for you. There is something appealing about that aspect. It's evil shit, but I think that there is a part of people that says, how can I force my way on people without having me to do it so they won't hate me? And how can I portray that in a positive light so they won't blame me for doing it? And that's, I think, the appeal of the state. The appeal of the state is I get to force my will on other people, but having them, if shit goes wrong, blame the president or the government instead of having to blame their neighbor who actually has no problem with what the government's doing.
Right. And there are those people who will actually, when you point out what they're doing and you really get them to face it, there are those people. And I will say that they're few and far between. They're not the rule. But they are those people who will quite literally verbally say and defend, I don't want to be attacked. I don't want the state used against me, but I should get to use it against my neighbor. But most people, when they're faced with that inconsistency, don't actually defend that. The one-off will. I had, in fact, the one guy that I watched actually verbally defend, yes, I do get to force my will on other people because we should get to, was a retired cop. But super shocking. But most people, since they imagine that they're moral and good people, the average person does, they imagine that they live a morally good life. If you turn around the gun on them and you get them to face that, now a lot of them will have a mental temper tantrum, and then they'll come back later, you know, they'll have to work through that on their own, and they might later become anarchists after they face that cognitive dissonance. But if they get past the mental temper tantrum they're having in the moment, and I've seen people do it, and they realize, wait a minute, I want to be able to force that onto my neighbor, but I constantly defend it when it's forced on me. I constantly say it shouldn't be used to make me live a certain way I don't want to live. And when they see the disconnect there in their morals, that's when they become anarchists. And that's how I became an anarchist. That's how almost every of the hundreds and hundreds of anarchists I've run into now online, that's how they became anarchists, or the thousands now of military that are awake and became anarchists and woke up to that. It was seeing this contradiction of, they really did believe they were morally good people, and so they believed they were consistent. And when you showed them, you want to use the state to make your neighbor comply with your demands, but the minute it's going to force you to do something that you don't want to have anything to do with, you're mad and you don't like it. So why do you get to do it to other people and they don't get to do it to you? And
my ideas were better.
Yeah, right. And that's how thousands and thousands and thousands of people are waking up. It was really cool to see Larkin do a poll at Anarchapulco of the room. The audience was maybe 300 to 400 people or so. And he did a poll of, you know, how many of you were anarchists 20 years ago, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, 2 years ago, 1 year ago. And it was insane. And then like all the way down to how many of you are anarchists today? Because some people, lots of, you know, people who are statists came to Anarchapulco too, and they left as anarchists. And the amazing number of people, like as you saw it get more and more recent in time, that were anarchists more recently, was insane. You could literally see right there a demonstration in a small sample size of people of the growth. And even Larkin, who was an anarchist 20 years ago and beating his head against the wall, he said, where he was talking to people who, like, nobody knew what the word was, nobody talked about it, nobody was listening. He said the difference between that and what I see now, he said, when, you know, now I've been in all 50 states and I've toured multiple times and I've talked to huge crowds of people. He said, and, you know, just between the difference between 10 and 5 years, and then the difference between 5 years and now, 5 years ago and now, it's like the ball rolling down the hill and picking up speed. It's immense. It's the ripple effect. The expanse and the growth of liberty is just, it's unstoppable at this point. And the reason being is because of the internet. So, you know, I tell people, look, when things are going a certain way throughout history, if certain things don't change because certain people have the ability to control the flow of information and communication, and so they can propagandize people, fool them, indoctrinate them. If things go a certain way long enough, history just repeats itself until something changes the game. And history can't repeat itself anymore because the internet changed the game. One of the biggest things the control freaks had was control over the flow of information. They could buy up all the newspapers in the country. They could, you know, have a few small, you know, companies, you know, have the government in their pocket and be controlling media and influencing media. They could have people covering the educational areas, and people's outlets to reality were television and newspaper. And if those two outlets are controlled and that's all you know, and then your parents went through the same schooling system you did, you don't even know that there is something to know that's wrong. The information's been cut off. The books you should have access to, you don't know exist. The things that are talking about real history, you don't know are there. Now we're all going around them and constantly. And they hate it in one sense because they know we're constantly communicating and sharing, and now the idea is the cat's out of the bag. But they also can't shut it down. They can't shut off the internet, because the one thing worse than us constantly communicating is them having a total blackout on what we're doing. They can't have that. They can't turn off what we're doing. And it also, the internet's still keeping a bunch of their, you know, people who would turn their eyes right on the government and see it for the problem it is. A lot of those people are still distracted too by the internet. You know, they're busy, you know, they're busy online jerking off to porn. So, you know, you shut that all down and all eyes are on the people who just shut it down. And now they can't see what we're doing. So they're not shutting it down. We have the internet and we're going around all their lines of communication, and they can't keep up, to the point that people are now not only no longer afraid of governments, but you have memes and videos and all kinds of things around the internet that are being shared, all centered around laughing at government organizations. And the most dangerous thing for an authoritarian power is to have people laughing at it, because you can't be afraid of something that you are mocking. And so that's one of the things that I love saying. I see that their inevitable end is coming. When? Who knows? In my lifetime, who knows? But that it's coming, it's a mathematical inevitability because of the ripple effect, because there isn't a backward motion. Once you lose the contradiction, you know, it's like Larkin and others have said, it's like you cease believing in Santa Claus. You don't just suddenly go back to believing in Santa Claus. So anyone who actually gets it and sees the contradiction, they don't go back. They go, oh, well, that was dumb. Now I'm free of that bullshit. Now I'm going to go on living and go around that.
Yeah, I think it's a bit too optimistic for my taste. I mean, I think that when, you know, Gutenberg invented the printing press, I'm sure there were a lot of anarchists who are saying, great, now we're going to be free. Before the printing press, only the church and the government was able to control the access of information, and now the average person can print books and disseminate them amongst the crowd, and we're going to have a freer society. That didn't freaking happen. So I don't think that.
The problem is that books are a physical thing you can control. You can go into a house and you can set on fire a bunch of books. There were book burnings, there were confiscations of things, there were all of that, and they still had a way, believe it or not, to drastically control by purchasing the printing presses. Even there was look at the book Tragedy and Hope that Carol Quigley wrote. I think it was published in 1966. That was a thoroughly footnoted, documented, thick book, history of the world in our time. And he spent like 20 years putting it together. And he was also an insider. He was a statist, but he didn't believe that a lot of these ideas they had about how to control the world should necessarily be hidden. So there's fully documented, heavily footnoted historical evidence of a massive amount of conspiracies, various government conspiracies, all in this potent book. Richard Grove at Tragedy and Hope has put a lot of work into getting this information out there and connecting the dots that people have missed out on. And that book, Tragedy and Hope, that was something that the people who were in power, that a lot of their plans were being put out into that book. They didn't know Carol Quigley planned to do that. And when it was suddenly put out into print or whatever, and they realized what had suddenly been put out into print, they put a stop on that as soon as they could. Well, the internet's different. It doesn't work like that. I can't go to, the one place which is the source of the internet or the source of the internet communication and just go, and just go, okay, I'm going to stop it. I'm going to stop all the communication that's happening. Now, anarchism and just the philosophy of clearing out irrational trains of thought that aren't consistent, that is something that it's shown there's a demonstrated rise in it in just the last decade. And one of the things that's interesting is people talking about how just the rise of philosophy at all, just philosophy, like actually understanding grammar, logic, rhetoric, and how to parse reality and think clearly, that's had a huge comeback. And they've traced it right back to the fact that the internet has brought that back. And now people are enrolling in philosophy and learning about, reading philosophy and reading philosophers and reading, the old greats that have been out of the school system for a while, more than ever before too. And there's this rise in basically the caliber of discourse people are having. And so there's a thinking revolution, all because of the internet, and they can't stop it. And that's why, you have these generations above you and I, like the baby boomers and a few others under them, where they're totally a product of the system. You see that their brain is in a total fog. They're not even curious about what might be real that they don't know about. Their reality comes straight from television. They have a bunch of contradictions in their brain. They swallowed everything the compulsory schooling system and TV gave them. And because they didn't grow up on the internet and they're unfamiliar with computers and they don't use it, they're just completely walled off. They're completely in this reality bubble that the state created for them, and they're sort of lost to it in a lot of ways. And a lot of that generation sort of just lost to it. And our generation and my generation, my dad was a tech geek, so I had computers even before my friends did. And I grew up when the messenger apps were becoming a big thing, Yahoo and MSN and, AOL Instant Messenger. And then the internet was becoming more and more regularly used. And then the spawning of Google and Yahoo and all that. And as soon as the internet was a thing and an option, me and all my friends that I knew, we were turning off the TV. We were getting on the internet. And now we have swaths of children all over the globe that are, especially in first world countries, that are literally growing up on the internet. And why is that valuable? The TV has these controlled stations and channels and outputs. The internet is this immense free-for-all world where the kid can go, oh, well, my teacher says this, but I'm just going to wiki that real quick. My teacher appears to be at least underinformed, because that's not actually the only narrative. There's actually a bunch of debate around this topic and controversy. My stepsons, who are almost 18 and 20 years old, the almost 18-year-old routinely argues with his history teacher because he's read actual history. So his history teacher will say something, and then he'll start an argument in class over it. He'll go, excuse me, that's not correct. And he knows more history than his history teacher does. And now he's sharing these ideas with his classmates, and he's starting discourse about the history of American compulsory schooling with his classmates. He shared John Taylor Gatto's book, Weapons of Mass Instruction, with his friends and had discussions with them about it. And it's amazing to see that this stuff is happening. And before the internet, you had the bubble that was handed to you. And as far as you knew, what your teacher said was correct, and what the newspaper said was correct, and what, you know, the guy wrote in this, you know, journal pamphlet over here must be true, because those were the only outlets you had, and you didn't necessarily have a lot of other ways to go around that, or to talk to someone across the globe who could say, hey, that's not actually correct, here's what actually happened, I was there for that event. Now we have instant mass communication. Instant. We didn't have that before. We have the instant video thing. And I think that's what's going to save us.
I mean, again, to burst your bubble, because I think I think, you know, that's great that your stepson's doing that, but I think it's unique. I'm a big fan, even though I think 1984 is a better book, in terms of the reality. I think we more live in a brave new world. And the philosophy behind the brave new world wasn't 1984, government controls people by controlling the information and determining what people see or not. In a brave new world, there's a free flow of information. And because there's just this free flow of information, people have no idea what's true and what's not true. And it just causes confusion that they just zone out and are distracted by empty pop culture. And I think that's the reality. The information may be there, but if the average person doesn't access it, it's useless. The average person is not going on YouTube and typing police abuse. The average person doesn't care enough to verify if what a teacher is saying is true or not. The average person is watching videos of people getting kicked in the nuts or cats peeing on someone's face. So this idea that the information's out there, yeah, but the average person doesn't care and is too apathetic to access it. So,
well, and the thing is, and that's why as far as the numbers game, for things to change, for any idea to become this, to have its tipping point where it's going to become something widespread eventually, you only need a tiny fraction of the population awake to understand it. It was the same with the flat earth versus the round earth discovery and all of that. Everything started as a very tiny portion of the population. And now, in fact, we're better off now because we still have the internet, and the expansive information is much, much, much faster. So imagine back then, without any internet, without any sort of thing, if something was absolutely true and there were enough people vociferously repeating it and saying it over and over and over again and demonstrating this in reality, it's inevitable that people figure it out. Now, it was a lot slower going then because the expanse of communication, or the immediacy of communication, is nowhere near what we have now. But you're going to have huge herds of people who don't care, like you said, to think beyond what are, you know, funny cat videos, and that's what they're doing. But what they will do is, when the more that people around them are starting to just sort of think a certain way and sort of go, yeah, Santa Claus isn't real, then the more they're like, you know, in the middle of their cat video, you know, or whatever, oh, well, everyone else seems to agree that Santa Claus isn't real, so, well, okay, I guess he's not real. And they go along, and the herds of people follow, and that's how it's always been. And when you figure out, when something's just absolutely true, and enough people figure out, enough people repeat it, that's where it's going. And the great thing is, we already have the evidence that it's already going that way. And literally every day, I've met people last week who have only been anarchists for a month. I met people a few weeks ago that had only been anarchists for 2 months, and people have been anarchists for a year, and people have been anarchists for 2 years and 5 years, and the numbers are constantly growing. And I'm seeing new ones and running into new ones online every day. So like, if I wake up 2 people and they're genuinely awake the way I am and you are now, they're not going back, and they're going out and talking about it to 2 more people. So the ripple effect, even on that tiny little level, is expansive because of just math, because of exponents. So the spread of it is inevitable. And it's already happening, and we already can see that anarchists that become anarchists they don't suddenly undo that. They pull their kids out of the school system. They start to or they talk to people around them. They start to educate their family and friends. They start YouTube live, you know, vlogs, and they start podcasts, and they write books, and they get out there and talk about it. And they're not, even if all they do is just stop giving the state support or stop living and hallucinating the state, they've already withdrawn that verbal and mental and you know, whatever, the vote and all the advocacy that goes towards that. They've already pulled out of it. Even if that's the tiniest thing they do, they just mentally are no longer advocating for the state. Even that is a huge thing. So it's still inevitable, and we have the evidence that it's already going in that direction, and it's only increased. The ball is rolling down the hill and gaining speed and going faster. And unless you just shut down all of the internet, that can't be stopped. Because again, we don't need most of the world to agree with us. for an idea to suddenly to have a shift. And it's sort of the 100th monkey experiment thing. It's one of those things where it's been demonstrated over and over and over again. If you have a small enough group of something here and they just start to really believe something and it sticks, then there's this weird thing where as enough of them grow and more and they get big enough, then it starts to just, there's a tipping point and it just catches like fire on the rest of the population. And, you know, Larkin's seen it from his own actual experience of what's great about people like him and others in the Liberty Movement who have done huge amounts of tours and talks is they have perspective on direct interaction with reality I don't have. I haven't talked to the crowds Larkin has talked to. I haven't met as many people Larkin has met. I haven't had the conversations he's had with as many people over 2 decades that he's had. I've been an anarchist for 4 years. That's it. And so he's got a huge perspective. And so he has literally a much more massive data set to deal with. And the actual effect of the internet on reality and the actual spread of things has just been insane, and it's only expanded and increased, and it's continuing to, and he's seeing it by, you know, he does various polls throughout time on his thousands of followers that he at least is connected to on Facebook, and it happens, you know, over and over and over again. So can you hang on one moment?
Go ahead.
Yeah, is there a way to like I don't know, pause and come back, or I don't actually know?
No, but I could edit it out, or I'll play. You know, I'll do a funny dance and distract the audience.
All right. All right. Well, here I'll just mute for a second. Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
And then I'll be right back.
No problem. We'll be back, folks. Change my shoes anyway. She'll be back in a second. Bum, 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 bum. All right. Hopefully won't be too much longer. If you have any questions, you can type them in the sidebar while you're waiting.
All right. Did that effectively mute, by the way?
Yeah, it's good.
Sure. Okay. I wasn't sure. All right. I had to go be mom for a minute. So I still have a 6-year-old. So I remind people I am a wife and mother. Sometimes that's why scheduling with me is a little bit tricky.
Yeah, no problem.
I still have to do all of that. So yeah, that's, you know, it's one of those things where I have enough, you know, actual evidence every day, and, you know, and have over the last few years, and then the perspective of, you know, hundreds of other anarchists too, and how people are growing or changing every day. They're changing their minds all the time. I'm watching people become anarchists every day. And so that's why it's just, I'm looking at reality and watching it happen, and it's not going to stop. And so that's one reason why I'm optimistic. Now, does that mean that I think that the state, you know, is gonna go down without a fight, and that there won't be pockets of violence? The police are harassing people every day. Military are still out there, but the more it becomes this thing that people no longer want to be a part of and no longer advocate, the more people are not, it's not looked at as good or moral to join the military or to become a cop. I already know people personally who thought about becoming cops and decided not to, particularly because cops are no longer well liked and it just felt like not a good idea. And so they pulled out. And I've already seen reports on, you know, police departments having trouble hiring. There's been hiring freezes on multiple police departments in multiple places, which is great to see too. So that's going to increase in our lifetimes quite a bit, especially with the internet and the expanse of anarchism and all of that. But the state, I don't think, is going to go away. However, I will say that what gives me hope is people who have huge perspectives that I don't have, or have a much larger data set over the course of 2 decades, like Larkin and friends of his and people who have been anarchists a long time. What gives me hope is, you know, to hear someone like Larkin say, if you had talked to me 10 years ago, I would have said, yeah, maybe we'll start to see the state fall in 500 years from now. And he said, now I absolutely believe we'll see a significant difference in our lifetime. I think we'll see the end of a lot of stuff. And so I'm, you know, assuming you don't die tomorrow, obviously, assuming you live a good amount of time.
If I live to over 100, I don't think that's the case. I mean, I don't know.
I'm hopeful because I see that it picks up speed. So again, if you look at math, the mathematical exponent of something and how fast the ripple effect is, if it doubles, the rate of growth doubles in 5 years, and then that doubles again in another 5 years, then it's not even growing at the same rate. The rate at which it's growing is also increasing. So that's why I am a lot more optimistic, because I've watched the data set and I've watched how fast it's been growing. And so that's why I'm absolutely excited. I'm just excited. Why? I'm excited to see what can happen. I don't have any attachment to what will or won't happen. I really don't. I don't have an attachment to a significant amount of change happening that I will, you know, see in an obvious way in my lifetime. But I already see a lot of change just in the world around me and in the dialogue and in what people are open to, and in the fact that, you know, a random stranger actually seems to be familiar with the notion of real liberty a little bit, even if they're, you know, not an anarchist. The fact that I see the Gadsden flag everywhere in Arizona, you know, just little shifts that they weren't there 20 years ago at all. There wasn't even a sign of it. There wasn't even rhetoric around that. And so I at least just have optimism in the sense that it's not an expectation of a certain thing to happen. It's just, I'm excited to see what will, because I already like the direction it's going in. So that's what I mean. It's not about necessarily going, oh, the state's going to totally fall in my lifetime. I don't think so, actually. But I'm just excited to see what will happen. I'm excited about what people are already doing and how fast things are changing and where things are going. And I think that's important. People who believe that things can change take action to help things change. You know, if I really believe my actions have no effect on the real world and I can't actually affect a real change, then I am mobilized and I don't do anything. And that's at least the worst thing people can do. You know, people like you and me obviously believe that talking and spreading the idea and putting media out there has value, or we wouldn't do it. And that's why people are doing it, and it does have value and it is spreading because, you know, the internet. There's a guy who posted about Anarchapulco, and he wasn't necessarily an anarchist at all, and he didn't even know what Anarchapulco really was. He wasn't in the anarchist community. He literally said, I just went to Anarchapulco because I stumbled across the conference thing. I stumbled across the idea of this conference on the internet on accident, and it turned out to be this beautiful, life-changing event for me. I mean, how incredible is that? This guy wasn't in the community. He didn't know about it. He just stumbled across it somehow looking for other stuff, saw the advertisement for Anarchapulco, ended up there and was like, what is this? Holy crap, this is neat. And was exposed to all these ideas he hadn't even been exposed to yet. And that one guy is now going to talk, and he's going to talk to people that he knows. So I'm just excited. I'm excited to see where things will go and what will happen. And I'm loving having people of like mind, obviously, like you know, to talk to be surrounded with. I'm loving that there's, you know, tens of thousands in the community now to just exchange with and discuss. And we're not alone. At least we can see that, because the internet, we can see, you know, you and I are not alone. We're not just crazies. We're not nuts. You know, as much as my family might think I've lost my shit, you know,
not the only one. Yeah.
Yeah, right. As much as my family might think I've gone batshit crazy, there is all they would have to do is unplug from their reality bubble. That's not correct, and actually look at the tens of thousands of people out there talking about the same thing I am, and then they would see it, So
Yeah.
I mean,
look, I always hope that my pessimism is wrong. Unfortunately, I'm usually correct, and usually it's more pessimistic than I imagine. But I mean, I don't know. I mean, I guess yes, it's a minority, but I think it has to be like 20-25%, and we're not anywhere close to that. And I think most people just write us off as crazy.
Yeah, the demonstrated number is like 10%, like demonstrated, like over and over in scientific experiments with both humans and just watching the growth of an idea, and having that, measured, whether it was in the monkeys thing or whether it's in humans. It's typically 10. Now we're far away from 10%. We're probably like 0.5%, less than 0.5%, but 10% is like the number that's been demonstrated enough is where the tipping point happens. And whatever that idea is, if it's the truth, like, again, like something that's been verified about science over and over again that everybody just knows, like Santa Claus not being real, like whatever, if it's just the true thing, like the earth is a globe kind of a thing, then there's some point at which if people really believe it and they really get it, it's like this tenth of the people, and then it's again like the ball rolling down the hill. It just picks up speed as it goes, and all of a sudden it's just poof, and it falls right down the hill and just
okay. But it's also asking, what are we going to offer you? The state's going to offer you free goodies. It's going to offer you the false sense of security, and what is anarchy offering you? A sense that you'll be laughed at, a sense that you'll be beaten up, a sense that people won't have anything to do with you, a sense of feeling that it's hopeless and failure. Like, I'm very sympathetic to the statist mindset in the sense that being an anarchist is fucking depressing. Like, if people say, do you think it's freeing being an anarchist? I'm like, no. Like, I look at people who are mentally, like, to me, being smart is a fucking, right? What's that expression? Having common sense is a curse, not a blessing, because you have to deal with all the people who don't have it. Like, if you look at the happiest people in the world, they're all like severely retarded. Happy people are not happy. Smart people are not happy generally.
Well, but that's the thing is, I went to Anarchapulco and I had this conference where I got to experience literally dozens of people who were some of the most intelligent, articulate, successful, like actually successful in their everyday lives and what they were doing and reaching their goals, being comfortable or well off, whatever, just of all different backgrounds, and absolutely optimistic and absolutely happy. And I tell people this all the time. Everything is perspective. If you choose to look at the immediate people around you and only focus on all the people who don't get it, and focus on the fact that you're in a world of people who don't get it right now, where most people don't get it, well, you're going to feel depressed. It's sort of like if I go into a room and I look for the color green, and you say, look for green, Amanda, look for green. And I look for green and I go, okay, I see all the green. And then I walk out of the room and I'm not in the room anymore. And then you go, all right, now tell me where all the red was in that room. I'm going to go, oh, crap. I don't know. I was looking for green. It's the same exact thing with the rest of reality. You get more of what you focus on. So I've met literally hundreds of upbeat, optimistic, totally happy, incredibly intelligent people who are anarchists, but they have a different perspective. They're looking at the growth. They're looking at where we weren't before and the massive expanse of where we are. In fact, the anarchists who have the most experience and have been around the longest are the most optimistic. Like Larkin and Ernie Hancock and a couple others I've met, Paul Gibbons and a few others who have been around for like 2 decades. They're the most happy and excited about what's going on. Why? Because they have a longer data set, a longer perspective, and they have watched the actual growth in reality. And so, yeah, if I choose to focus on all the people who don't think like me, that's really frustrating. And at first, when you become an anarchist, there is a shell shock there. There's a sense of, holy crap, like the world isn't what I thought it was. And I went through a state of feeling a little bit depressive for a while. And I think if you grow as an anarchist, one, you sort of, I don't know how to put it, you sort of just go, okay, this is the reality, this is the world. You kind of get used to it. You kind of get used to people are still statists, lots of them are. And then you go, okay, but now I'm awake. Now I know better. And now I'm also seeing that I'm surrounded by people that used to be asleep like me. Like, I can look at the statists and be depressed, or I can see them as people who someday don't need to be statists. If I got free and I was a conservative Christian who thought Bush was the greatest thing since sliced bread as a kid, if that was me, okay, and I'm standing here right now able to argue with anyone logically and consistently for why government is illegitimate and immoral, then anyone can fucking get clear of it. If I had dinner the other night with a man who was a former cop, who is now full-blown anarchist and has been for a few years and is no longer a cop. If I can talk to multiple veterans who have actually given witness to being part of horrible acts and atrocities that they're recovering from and have PTSD from, and they're awake and they're anarchists, then any statist around me right now could be one, and it could just be a matter of time. Does it mean they're all going to turn and we have to win them all? We don't. No. But we were all statists at some point, including Larkin Rose, including, Ernie Hancock. People, we were all at some point, we just accepted the reality our parents handed us, and we didn't know better. Some of us caught on earlier than others, and every great once in a while, I meet someone who was born at least without having been indoctrinated, because their parents had been anarchists since like the 70s and actually understood it and were anti all forms of government. I meet a few of those every once in a while. They literally grew up as anarchists, and they're rare, but I've even met those. I mean, but the vast majority of us were statists. I was a statist, and look where I am. Someone right now today could be talking about me like, oh, statists are just, people. She just wants to believe in Bush. She just wants her reality bubble, and it's just hopeless, and she's not going to wake up. Except that I did. Except that the thousands of people I met online all did. They all believed at some point, even if it was in slavery light.
That's why I think a lot of the Facebook anarchists like drive me nuts. Like, because I spent a lot of my time just criticizing other anarchists because I don't really like them, and I think their rhetoric sucks, and I think their arguments suck too. And first of all, like this whole, like the fooing nonsense that fucking Molyneux started, that pisses me off. And right, and it's like all the time, like sometimes I'll see on Facebook or something, someone's like, if you're voting for Trump, defriend me now, and I'm like, who the fuck are you, you arrogant ass? You think anyone gives a shit if they're your friend or not? Right? No one gives a fuck about you. No one cares about you, besides for maybe your family and a few friends. Most of the world doesn't care if you're dead on the street choking on your own vomit. It's just the harsh reality of life. People don't care about you. And, I think there is a lot of this arrogance that a lot of anarchists have of everyone in the world is a brainwashed idiot, and let me tell you why I'm morally superior to you. And then they're surprised that other people are not persuaded by them. Yeah, I wonder why.
And I think that, and part of it is, and then people say, you can't win heart, nobody wants to be awake. Well, yeah, if you walk up to, how well did you respond to somebody going up and beating you over the head with what they think and going, your belief system's wrong, I have to give you a new one. And it was like Larkin talked about it at Anarchapulco when he gave his talk, which I thought was really valuable. And I love pointing, you keep touching on points that he touches on a lot, so it's worth referencing. And he said, we don't need to try to go up to people and sell them on a new religion. We don't have to remove this ideology they have and then replace it with a new set of ideas. We just have to undo one tiny little lie. That's it. That some people get an exemption from morality. And there are ways to do that if you understand human psychology. And part of that is just basic empathy. I think people who are like that, first of all, now that I've been active enough in the real world, like the anarchist community, and I've actually met enough actual real world anarchists, I can tell you this: the people like that you described on the internet, they're still the minority of the community. Most anarchists that I've run into, most of them that I've physically talked to, and even most of the ones actually I've talked to online, most of them are passionate, excited, and they remember that they were a statist, and they are trying through a reasoned, kind, and careful discourse that keeps in mind the psychology of the other person, trying to win people over. And I've seen it recently on my page. My best friend posted, something between us, but she posted on my wall, so it was still public, joking about a military parking sign, like for military members only. And she's like, hey, my mom said, she's like, I had to take a picture of this, but my mom jokingly said I should spit on it first. Well, my grandmother saw the post and, commented on it because she was very offended. Most the anarchists that responded to my grandmother were reasoned, and rationally and calmly providing their perspective. In fact, a bunch of veterans actually responded and said, I'm a veteran, blah, blah, blah. And most of them were just balanced and keeping in mind where she was coming from and relating to her, saying, I used to be where you were and I understand where you are. I would say like 2 out of 10, you know, were like, you've never had a rational thought in your life. You're a fucking moron. You know,
but even that's the meaning, right? If I go to someone and I say, you know, I used to think like you. That's the meaning, because what does it imply? I used to be an idiot too, but now I saw the light. So I think even that perspective of, hey, I used to think like you, that's the meaning. I used to be
not to everyone. I thought it was relatable. Like not to everyone, and I can say that why, because I experienced it. I had people say that. It's now a lot of it is tone, a lot of it is body language. You miss that online, true. But you if you relate to someone first, if you say, look, I really believed this, and this, you know, and maybe don't use the words I used to think like you, because just that phrase isn't as gentle, although it works with some people. But if you say something like, look, I really believed the military was awesome. I really believed they served our interests. I was in it. Then you're saying, look, I was right where you're standing. I actually was with you. I would have stood with you 5 years ago. And when someone hears that, it does something to their brain. Now, it doesn't mean they're immediately going to become an anarchist. That's not how it works. For me, it was a progression too. I had to be exposed to something and think hard about it multiple times. But it does force their brain to go, okay, this person talking to me, they didn't live a totally different life like I wanted to assume they did, which is sometimes what a statist will do. They want to assume that somehow we just magically became anarchists out of nowhere, but we don't know what it's like to be a statist, or we don't know what it's like to be in the military. So these veterans come up and go, hey, I'm like one girl, she was a woman veteran too, which makes her comment even funnier. She came on, she said, hey, I'm a veteran, and I would say to spit on the sign too. and then another couple of people came on and said, hey, I was in the military and I really thought that we were fighting for freedom. And they addressed my grandmother by name, and they're like, I really believe this, but I directly experienced the things that we were going through. And that if you are, if you're a person who you want to comfortably believe that this group of people who disagree with you, like my grandmother, I'm sure wants to believe that this group of people who disagrees with you are just totally different and they don't know your reality and they never experienced it. And she almost tried to assert that. She tried to assert, well, you guys have never done this, or you don't know what it's like, or you weren't in the military, blah, blah, blah. She tried to assert some things or assume that these people must not know anything about military life or what it's like, or didn't know, whatever. And that they're just kids or something, or they don't know what they're talking about. Well, guess what? A bunch of actual grown adults who many of whom had been in the military and seen what it really does were saying, this is what's actually happening. This is what the military is really doing. This is what I learned. And the information's there. And a lot of them said the information's there if you want to see it. And so just because someone is an idiot and doesn't know how to have a good conversation with someone because all they know how to do is be angry and beat people over the head and go, I'm morally superior to you and you're a bad evil statist. Just because they don't know how to do that doesn't mean there aren't a million people that do. And just because someone says, well, nobody's waking up because they can't, because beating people over the head isn't working, doesn't mean people aren't waking up. It means they're doing it wrong. It's like, look, just because you didn't wake anybody up doesn't mean people don't wake up, because obviously you woke up and I did, and so did thousands of other people. So just because you're not, just because beating people over the head with my moral superiority isn't working doesn't mean there isn't a good way to understand how to talk to people and to do that. And what's cool is going to anarchist events, like in person and liberty events, you get to meet a bunch of people who are actually empathetic and actually understand psychology, and they talk like they do, and you can tell they do. They're very kind. They listen. They give people credit for what it is they believe and how long they've believed it, and they acknowledge that. One great example was how the minarchist who came to debate Larkin was treated. He was invited to the banquet. He was invited to all the anarchist parties. He hung out with all the anarchists. People were kind and awesome to him, and there's this backlash, it wasn't whatever. When it came to the battle of ideas, sure, people were like, no, dude, you're delusional, you got it wrong, whatever. But he's the one who wanted to debate Larkin, so he knew what he was putting himself up against. The guy acknowledged the following night after the debate to a crowd of people, no less, in his own mind, he'd always won debates as far as he knew. I don't, you could contest that maybe, but in his mind, he'd won against supposed anarchists before. And he said to the crowd, "I've never lost a debate until last night." And not only did he not just admit that to one person, he admitted that to a crowd full of a couple hundred people. And that's significant. And it also says something about how people can treat others, because every one of us there knew he wasn't on board, and yet people were kind, and people tried to have gentle discourse with him. And when people would present questions to him after the debate and start to say, "Hey, how do you account for this? How do you account for this?" He was actually willing to say, "You know what, I can't really, I don't have an answer to that," And so, beating, like you said, beating people over the head with "I'm morally superior" is not how it works. But if you go out there and meet people in the liberty movement, you'll see that those idiots are a minority, and they're usually the ones in their houses who don't go outside, who are afraid of the world, in their mom's basement kind of a thing. And they're just angry and mad that their family doesn't agree with them. And so they're just taking it out on the world and trying to be morally superior. And they're not actually going out and actively trying to engage people from where they're coming from, remembering they are still statists, and I was one too. So I have to remember they're where I was, and I have to talk to that. I can't talk to them like, they should be where I am, because obviously they aren't where I am, and they shouldn't just be there instantly. That's not how it works, So
I mean, I wrote this article a while ago called, and I believe it, called "There's No Such Thing as Brainwashing." And, to me, the term brainwashing is sort of like the term irrational. It's just a way to explain away things you can't have. Just because someone believes something you don't believe in doesn't mean they're a brainwashed idiot. Okay? First of all, everyone in the world, in my opinion, no matter how smart you are, believes in one thing which is retarded, at least. I probably believe in one thing which is retarded. I don't know what it is, otherwise I wouldn't believe in it. I obviously don't think it's retarded. But everyone in the world believes in at least one thing, which is like, how can you believe in that? And
probably.
Yeah, so I mean, I think, I don't like when people say, "Oh, these people are, brainwashed." And no, but I mean the term brainwashed in a nice way, that they don't mean to be violent, they're just brainwashed. And I'm like, no, people have very rational reasons to believe what they believe, right? I've actually heard very good arguments in support of the government. I don't think they're right. I don't think they're correct, but there are good arguments, and I think to just explain them away, I think is wrong and problematic. I mean, I remember, and this is why, like, I'm not a fan of talking about anarchy in terms of the non-aggression principle, because anarchy is not about the non-aggression principle. It's about proportional punishment. And saying it's about the non-aggression principle is just vague. And like I don't know if you know who Jan Helfeld is, and I was debating him, and he's like, "What do you steal an apple to survive?" And I'm like, and I gave him an honest answer, which is yes. And anyone who says no is a liar, right? And Larkin Rose said he wouldn't, and Robert Murphy said he wouldn't. And I like those people, but they're full of crap, okay? If you wouldn't steal an apple to live, you don't value your own life. But the appropriate response isn't, therefore, property rights aren't absolute. The right response is proportional punishment. The consequences of stealing an apple are less severe than starving to death. I'm going to steal the apple because it's in my self-interest to do so, but I also acknowledge that the guy has every right to seek reparations against me, and I'll reimburse the guy 2-3 apples or work for the guy or whatever it has to do. So I have to make good on stealing the apple, but I'm still going to do it because, come on, right? Like I was in class the other day, and the professor said to me, "Would you kill someone to save 1 million people?" And I said, "I'd kill a stranger to save my family." What does that have to do with anything?
And I think that if you all the way believe that something is not justified, that it's evil no matter what, then it's something that you don't sacrifice. For example, like if I think that it's all the way, there's no such thing as it being justified to kill someone less than self-defense, then that is something that is a part of my identity. Now, if something's truly part of your identity, I tell people this all the time, like the way you know something's truly a part of someone's identity is when holding to that value is greater than their own life. And for a lot of people, it is. I and people I know personally, like Larkin, for example, would absolutely rather die than go against our own principles because we don't believe it's justified to violate someone else just to save our own life. Because again, that purports that my life inherently has more value than someone else in their life and their property. Now, I will say this, Larkin's not full of crap, but that's because I know him very well. And I know what he would say is that presenting those scenarios is also a false, it's a false reality and a false dichotomy. And why? One reason Larkin wouldn't steal an apple to survive is because Larkin would say, I would never be in a position where I absolutely had to steal an apple just to survive. There's also about a million ways to get food in this world. For example, lots of people might die because they're totally ignorant of the fact that there's a million plants they can eat around them, but they don't know that. They imagine they have to get food from a restaurant, so they die. Now, they imagine that. It doesn't make reality less real. It doesn't make the fact that they could have stayed alive if they knew how to figure things out. It doesn't change the fact that things around them existed to eat. And it doesn't make the immoral act they did moral. You might have done it to survive. You might have had a good reason to do it because you wanted to do that for your own interests. Like I might have said, you know what? I really didn't have anything I thought I could eat. So I thought I had to steal from someone in order to eat. And someone might say, you know what, that's not that big a deal. Look, I don't want you to starve. So you know what, I'll let that go that you stole my apple or whatever. That doesn't make the fact that I stole good. It just makes the reason I stole, maybe the best you could say is that I wouldn't normally have done it and that I did it because I thought I had to.
I agree.
But it doesn't suddenly make it a moral act. So defense, like if I actually believe that it's that my property, whether that's my person, my house, the expanse of that, if I believe that that is not inherently better than someone else's, or I don't have a higher claim to my own than someone else has to theirs, then in consistency with my own principles, then I'm not going to go and take someone else's just because I don't have enough of mine. I won't do that. Again, even if it causes me to die. Why? Because that's a principle I have, meaning it's a part of my identity. And I don't believe that my life, I have a higher claim to my life. My life has more value and should exist more so than someone else's. And if I really believe that my life has a higher claim than someone else's, like survival of the fittest kind of thing, or might makes right, then I do believe, look, if I really need it, then I guess I will go take your property. And if I'm the sort of person that'll do that, then I'm not actually moral in principle. I'm just pragmatic. I'm sort of like, well, I'm only good until you have something I think I really need, and then I'll just go and freaking take it by force because I think that I should. And there's actually been lots of philosophers who have written about this throughout history, and they've said, if you're surrounded by a group of people who are allowing you to live in freedom simply because that's what mostly benefits them at the moment, because they don't need any of your stuff or they don't want it that bad, that's one thing. But if you're surrounded by a group of people who it's part of their identity and part of their belief that they don't actually have a higher claim to their life than to yours, and they fundamentally will never, ever believe it's correct and never will, because it goes against who they are, to rob from you or steal from you or whatever, and they would rather die than do that, which is actually a good number of people I've met and known in my life. They would rather die than do that. You're safer with this group of people than this group of people, because this group of people over here, the minute that they are hungry enough, they want something you have bad enough, or think they can get away with it enough and they want it enough, or think they need it or decided they need it enough, they don't have any belief at all that there's anything actually wrong with it once they need it enough or think they need it enough. So all they need is a situation where they're panicking or fearful or hungry, and now you're in serious danger. This group of people over here, whatever it takes, they're going to do whatever it takes to take care of themselves. And it's not even on the table as an option to go and take from someone, to rob someone, to kill someone or whatever. And I also tell people that scenarios like would you kill this one person to save, 10 million? Unlike is portrayed in movies and media and other propaganda that's been around for decades, that scenario doesn't almost ever freaking happen. People imagine it does, or think it's routine, or it's this thing that happens, but it nearly never happens. And I don't go around postulating about scenarios that I will never encounter in my everyday life. For one, like it doesn't have any value. How do I actually live right now? And what am I going to do in my day-to-day life right now? What do I need to know to live right now? What I need to know is the data I have right now coming into me as my life is. And as long as these are the scenarios I reasonably believe I'm going to continue encountering, I plan for that. But I can't possibly know what tomorrow will bring. And so I'm not interested in planning for the weirdest, most unlikely possible scenario, or guessing about it, or talking about it. I'm interested in going, what's right to do right now? What's right to do right now is to go, I don't want to be attacked. I don't want to be stolen from. I don't want to be aggressed against. So if I think no one should do it to me, then to be consistent, I'm not doing it to someone else. And that's all of it. That's all that is. And when you reveal that to people, that's why the average person, when you reveal the inconsistency, goes, oh, okay. And that's all they need. They don't need anything else. It's just, I'm being inconsistent. Because most people think they're consistent. Like you said, most people have really good reasons for believing what they believe, and they really do imagine that they're sane and they make sense, and they have reasons for believing what they believe. And as soon as you show them, look, in your own worldview, what you're saying doesn't make sense, that's when it clicks. And that was me. I figured out, wait a minute, I don't believe it's good to steal. I don't believe it's good to kill people. I don't want to attack people, and I don't want to be attacked. So why does this group of people get an exemption from that? Huh? Or why would I use that group of people to do that to my neighbor? I don't actually want that done to me. And as soon as I realize I'm inconsistent, it's gone. Right. You know, and that's the average person. That's what we're dealing with. And so,
well, I mean, the reason I say stuff like I would steal the apple to live isn't, I mean, first of all, in the real world, I mean, I mainly just say that so they shut up and stop annoying me with that question because it's dumb. And in the real world, there's always alternatives. I mean, the point of the experiments are there's never a scenario where, you know, you're on the train track and you have to kill 1 to save 5. The point of these scenarios are simply to try to justify people's immoral actions. That's the whole purpose. There's never going to be a case where the only way to live is to steal someone's apple. Everyone has a price. If you say, I'll pay you $1 million for that apple, what are the odds the guy's going to say no? So these are just stupid excuses to try to justify your own immorality. So I'll just concede and I'll say, fine. You want me to say yes? I'll steal a fucking apple, but that's not. It doesn't matter what I do. It doesn't matter. Slavery is immoral, even if I own slaves. It doesn't make a difference how I behave. How I behave, how you behave, is completely and utterly irrelevant to anything.
Right. In other words, it doesn't. You know, sort of people try to point out something you would do or not do, to try to make a statement about what's objectively moral or immoral. And it's like, look, reality still exists outside of what I do or don't do. Just because I might choose to do something doesn't make that a good idea. And it doesn't mean that somebody won't retaliate. And you know what I mean? Like, I don't hallucinate the rest of the world to be super understanding and gracious. And I also don't hallucinate the rest of the world.
And the argument's retarded. Because if your argument's going to be, as long as I can find someone willing to behave in a certain way, it's acceptable, fine, I'll just find a guy willing to rape and commit mass murder, and now we can justify mass murder. I mean, what's the point of these experiments beyond just, I'm going to make a scenario that's not analogous, right? It's not analogous. Right. The state stealing your money every freaking day is not analogous to a once in a blue moon scenario where you need to steal an apple to live. It's not analogous, and reimburse the guy later, which the government never ever does. So it's not analogous.
I had a conversation with a guy once, and he was very memorable because I don't think I've ever met anybody quite like him. It was the first time in my life where I thought, you know what? I think talking to a legitimate sociopath. And it was one of those things where he started a conversation with me in public, and most people don't even start conversations like this in public. But he started talking to me almost immediately about, what was it? About, you know, whether or not people should vaccinate their kids. And he was very adamant that, you know, basically everybody should be trusting the medical system and trusting the government and getting vaccinated, whatever. And he started off a conversation about that. And then he goes right into this weird thought experiment that he wants to do with me. He's like, I can totally make you have like a psychological tantrum. He was very arrogant. Like, he was telling me ahead of time, like, I'm going to make you very confused, and I'm going to give you a very hard scenario. You'll really struggle with this. He was like talking to me this way. And I'm struggling to not say, fuck you. You don't know who I am. Why are you talking to me like I must be some moron? And he was so sure that he had this brilliant scenario planned out. And he basically tried to create this amazingly impossibly unlikely scenario where basically I would have to choose between a bunch of people dying and saving a sick baby or something. And his whole scenario hinged on me. It basically hinged on, you know for sure that if you don't kill this baby's illness is going to make all these other people ill. And I would say, and I undermined his entire experiment because I said, there's no scenario in the real world where I could actually know that for certain. I said, because with absolutely no sickness ever can I have absolute omniscient God knowledge that that sickness will absolutely infect everyone nearby? I can't actually know that for sure. In fact, with no sickness ever in the history of man has it been verifiably true that you could predict with total certainty that a sickness would get X amount of people sick, absolute guaranteed. It's a wild thing in nature. It's biology. You can't actually predict it. It might get everyone nearby sick, and you don't know when it'll stop or how far it'll spread, and it might not spread at all, and it might get this guy sick and not this guy that was exposed to it right here, and you can't know. But he wanted to start with this premise that somehow I could know for sure, so it would just absolutely be wrong to leave the baby alive. He was trying to basically argue that I should kill the sick baby. And I said, first of all, I said, I don't have to play your game. You're assuming I have to play your thought experiment. I said, that scenario doesn't exist in the real world. So I don't play what ifs with things that don't actually happen to me or wouldn't happen to me, or that I would have to invent a fantasy realm practically that that thing would happen to me. I said, and then second of all, even if I was in that situation, the me in that situation could absolutely not have certainty that the sickness would actually kill 1 million people. So I would actually be killing a baby based on a guesstimate, maybe. Yeah. And I wouldn't know that for sure. So, and it was weird because he was very focused on this. And as soon as I didn't fall into his trap, he weirdly tangented into this discussion of you know, the world of the Hunger Games. Are you familiar with the Hunger Games world? Did you read the books or watch the movies?
I saw part of the movie. I didn't really like it, but yeah.
He tangented into it, and it's totally it's an analogy, and is an obvious analogy for the U.S. imperialist thing and what it does to the rest of the world. And the capital is obviously the U.S. and it's this cartoon version of it, but it's totally it. And he starts talking about the Hunger Games world all of a sudden, and I don't know how he got there. And I'm like, what is this guy doing? Where is his brain going? And he starts talking about how, you know, there's always been the people who are just good at ruling other people and good at, you know, making stuff happen and getting what they wanted. And that, you know, we're just lucky because we get to live in the capital. Like, we're the capital and we're just lucky, you know, and that's why we should just enjoy being in the capital and having our little, you know, cozy, prosperous, you know, prison of you know, rich people. And we shouldn't care that other people are suffering because of what the capital's doing, or that, you know, it's because of violence, because, you know, we should just enjoy that. And I'm like, I don't even know where the guy got the idea to start talking to me in the first place. I was minding my own business in Barnes & Noble, and I'm looking at books. So I wasn't even giving the vibe that, hey, I'm open for conversation. And then he tangented through like 3 different topics out of nowhere. And I'm going, what is going on with this guy's head? And then not a single person I ever have known, ever, not even a statist who's watched the Hunger Games, thought the Capitol was the great place to be because it was full of, because it was just full of all these awesome people, and that it would be just cool to, like, you know, advocate your huge violent ruling class that just murders everyone else around who doesn't live in the capital, and that would be cool, and who cares? Not a single person I know thinks that. They all think the capital is a horrific thing, and the people in it are completely delusional and advocate for horrible things and think that it's cool to murder children and whatever. And it was analogous to the US, and most people know that. And this guy was like, capital's great. And I'm going, who are you, dude? This guy is truly messed up in the head. And then the weird part about all that was he had this rehabilitated fighter pit bull that was trained to be a fighter pit bull, and he had rehabilitated him and tried to heal him because he has this passion for helping pit bulls that were fighters and you know, basically kind of saving their soul sort of thing. So he really loves animals, which I thought was very twisted and inconsistent, because he clearly had no regard really for human life, and that was obvious in about 10 minutes of talking to him in a sort of creepy way. And that was the first time in my life I thought, okay, you're not just somebody who's, you know, you have a distorted worldview or you have some contradictions floating around like we all do. You're conscious of the crap you totally advocate, and you're just like, it's great. It's awesome. He was the first person I ever met who was quite like that. And
sounds like he's probably an environmentalist, because they don't give a shit about people.
And yeah, like the earth, you know, humans are a scourge, and like the tree is the greatest thing in the world kind of
right
thing.
Yeah, fuck the humans, save the butterfly. Yeah.
Right, exactly. And those people do frighten me because they're
yeah. I was walking on the street and someone's like, "We want to ban this thing that'll kill mosquitoes." I'm like, "You mean like they banned DDT and people got malaria because they couldn't kill mosquitoes?" I'm no thanks. Like, I don't give a shit about fucking insects. I care about human life.
The best way to trap someone is when they say, you know, humans are a scourge on the planet. Well, you know what? Lead by example. Kill yourself.
Yeah, I agree with Walter Block. Everyone who complains about overpopulation is a hypocrite. Just kill yourself. Stop being a part of the problem. Right. You have it within your power to reduce the human population. It's the same thing. I think when people say, like, would you kill one person to? I think you should kill one person to save the planet. Okay, let's start with you.
Right. It's like, oh, well, I don't want it to be me. Well, yeah. Oh, so you don't want it to be you. Okay, so you don't think that you should just kill any one person to save the planet. You think you should kill another person that's not you.
That's what I said to the professor. I said to the professor in class, he's like, well, do you think two people should die to save the world? So you'll kill one guy to save the world, and then if the heirs want to execute you, you should be willing to take the punishment. And if it's okay to kill one person to save 1 million, how about 2 to save 2 million? How about 1 million to save 1 billion? How about 1 billion to save 1 trillion? Now you're just justifying genocide and mass murder. So these
another way to trap them is to say, you like, objectively speaking, you could say this and that, you know, you trap them. Objectively speaking, you could save the lives of 10 other people by killing yourself and donating all your organs.
Yeah. True.
So you know what? Since you could save the lives of 10 other people, you're actually letting people die by just living when you could kill yourself and donate all your organs to save 10 other people. Why aren't you killing yourself? And that's where you point out the hypocrisy. Oh no, you just think other people should have to die as long as it's not you.
I agree. So well, that's a great way to end the video. I think it's been like an hour and a half. Anyway, great having you on.
Thanks. It was nice talking. I really enjoyed it.
Me too.
So have a really great day, and I'll you know, anytime you want to have me on in the future, if I'm free and I can, I'll be happy to.
Will do.
So.
All right.
Have a good day, Daniel.
You too. Bye.
Bye.